Viewers to BBC Two are about to be assailed by another half hour of anarchy with Neil, Rick, Mike and Vivian, the young ones. Here on One in half an hour, Jack Lemmon stars as a Georgia governor who risks his political career to challenge the verdict in part one of the award-winning Murder of Mary Fagan. Here on BBC One now, the 9 o'clock news from Michael Buerk.
Hundreds of thousands of blacks in South Africa have gone on strike to protest about not having a vote in tomorrow's election. The campaign of mass defiance gathers strength despite hundreds of arrests. And the clerk who nearly got away with £23 million. Good evening. Trouble is breaking out again in South Africa's townships on the eve of an election in which once more the black majority has no say. Hundreds of thousands of blacks joined a nationwide general strike in protest today, part of a campaign of mass defiance that's gathering strength despite police beatings and widespread arrests. Tomorrow's vote will be the strongest electoral challenge the ruling National Party has faced for 40 years, a crucial test for its new leader, Mr. F.W. de Klerk. This report has been compiled under the South African government's reporting restrictions.
The effigy of F.W. de Klerk, almost certain to be South Africa's next president, put to the torch in a township tonight. Burnt at the stake after 5 weeks' black defiance, a deliberately provocative gesture on the eve of a poll which excludes South Africa's majority. For Archbishop Tutu, a day to purify his cathedral, a service of reconsecration after police burst in last night with whips and guns, breaking up a choral concert. Sacrilege, according to the Archbishop, sanctifying in particular the doorway his dean says was violated and profaned.
The police broke into the church carrying guns and quoits and wearing their heads in this holy place.
Never before has the government moved so strongly against the churches, wedging an armoured personnel carrier across the door of this Methodist church. A Supreme Court ruling declaring their actions unlawful came too late to stop police whipping people trying to attend a protest service. The elections divide even communities who do have a vote tomorrow. These school children denounced a local candidate for the racially segregated Indian Chamber, incensing an election supporter. In the black townships, the union's call for a general strike kept thousands away from work. Soweto railway stations, normally thronged, were almost empty. A symbolic blow at an economy already battered by sanctions and apartheid. Creeping poverty is the issue taken up by the white liberal opposition, hoping to weaken the National Party's 40-year hold on power. For this little boy, his only meal of the day, a handout at a Johannesburg soup kitchen. This is not the international image of white South Africa. These are victims of a failing economy, of rising unemployment and falling living standards. In this suburb, Jan Hofmeyer, the Afrikaners used to think poverty was the lot of black families. Their National Party, the guarantee of a job, dignity, superiority. Not anymore.
The family cut down on essentials, like meat, and still they were managing, just.
But they couldn't keep up the mortgage payments. Over 21,000 families are threatened with packing up, leaving home.
Isn't it time we send this government packing? Vote DP.
But at the end of this campaign, DP predictions of heavy government losses of a hung parliament sound increasingly unrealistic. The latest slogan may be seductive, but it flies in the face of reality. The truth is, most white South Africans do vote their fears, not their hopes. Weeks of anti-government defiance have heightened white insecurity. Many uncertain voters moving towards the DP are believed to be swinging back behind the National Party government, with its track record putting down opposition. Security won the '87 election for the government. If the tide is turning, it looks like turning in the government's favour once more, putting F.W. de Klerk firmly on top. James Robbins, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Here, a couple who tried to defraud Britoil of £23 million have been jailed for 5 years. A cashier, Alison Anders, pleaded guilty to 3 charges, including attempted fraud. Her former lover, Royston Allen, a businessman from Aberdeen, was found guilty of the same charges. The couple stood to make £10 million if the fraud had succeeded. The rest would have gone to accomplices.
If it wasn't for 2 unconnected and singularly minor queries, Alison Anders may well have fulfilled her half-joking wish of sharing a £10 million fortune with her lover, Royston Allen, on a beach in Rio. Scotland's biggest fraud attempt was made on its biggest spending industry. Britoil had to pay their lease for the drilling rig on the Clyde platform, £23 million made out to a London bank. As a Britoil cashier, Alison Anders knew of the forthcoming transaction. She talked about it to her lover, Royston Allen. Together, they planned the fraud. The authorised transfer money order came to Miss Anders. She destroyed it and replaced it with a forged international payment application, directing Britoil's bank to pay nearly £23.5 million into a Swiss bank account. Ironically, her bosses had ignored her earlier warnings of a lack of security in their cash office. On schedule, the forged international payment arrived at Britoil's bank in Glasgow. Only the sharp eyes and curiosity of a bank clerkess who queried the message, "Urgent Telex confirmation," written on the form, made them ask questions. But before the bank telephoned Britoil, Alison Anders had disappeared. She'd heard of a separate query from one of Britoil's partners, a small technicality which would temporarily hold up the payment of the £23 million for the Clyde drilling rig. Miss Anders knew she was in trouble, and she put her escape plan into operation. That plan came straight from the pages of the novel The Day of the Jackal. Had she lived, Anne Killick would have been around Alison Anders' age. A copy of the dead child's birth certificate, her own photograph, the forged signature of the Killick's family vicar, and the £15 fee were all Miss Anders needed for a British passport and a new identity. She fled to Abu Dhabi, the oil-rich Middle East state, where, according to Miss Anders, sinister and powerful men Royston Allen had met, had set up the network to bank and launder the £23 million haul. The mafia, she said, was supposed to get £8 million, but it was a local businessman who arranged for her to disappear, at least from the law. Via Singapore and Vancouver, Miss Anders finally arrived in Portland, Oregon, where she could have stayed undetected if it hadn't been for her lover's wife. It was Megan Allen who went to the police with documents and telephone numbers that led them to the woman they'd been looking for nearly a year. BP, who now own Britoil, say they've tightened up procedures, but point out that the attempted fraud did fail. The main reason for that, though, was Alison Anders' attempt to speed up the international payment. If she hadn't done that, she may well have been on that beach in Rio with a new identity that had cost her just a little research and an investment of £15.
Union leaders are pressing Neil Kinnock to go further in repealing major sections of the Conservatives' trade union legislation. The unions and Labour say there's no serious disagreement between them, but the TUC has voted for changes in the employment laws which go beyond the Labour Party's plans.
Mr. Kinnock arrived in Blackpool tonight for a private meeting with TUC leaders. He shrugged off demands from the conference for him to scrap the government's laws curbing the unions.
Yes, I'm the leader of the Labour Party. We will win the election. I'll be the Labour Prime Minister. And we'll conduct industrial relations laws that are balanced, that are fair, that work in the democratic interests of the country generally, including individual members of trade unions and trade unions of collective bodies. Trade unions will have their opinions, but that's the position and that's how it will remain.
The TUC wants Labour to go much further in restoring union rights. What they want now is for unions to regain the immunity from court action they enjoyed before the Tories came to power. What's hardened opinion is the docks dispute, where some workers were dismissed, and the transport union was challenged in court over its right to strike. It says the laws must be repealed.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we want a blank cheque or carte blanche from the Labour Party. I am saying that workers should be entitled to go into dispute without fear of being dragged into court and massive fines of damages against them. In the British Constitution, there's no right to strike. Therefore, immunities were built into our legal system.
Today's debate was low-key, with few leaders of major unions taking part. They're trying to keep their arguments behind the scenes. The delegates know that Labour's pledge to allow them to take secondary action again will be controversial enough. Tonight, Neil Kinnock publicly put a distance between himself and the unions. But this issue of union power won't go away that easily. The Labour leader doesn't want to be accused of being in the TUC's pocket, and he knows that today's resolution will be a certain vote loser.
The TUC has called for a ban on imports of toxic waste into Britain. Delegates voted to urge all unions not to handle toxic waste cargoes. That decision, made despite the reservations of the TUC General Secretary Norman Willis, follows the refusal by dockers last month to handle a shipment of poisonous PCB chemicals from Canada. The chemical treatment company Rechem, where the PCB waste was to be incinerated, accused the TUC of jumping on a green bandwagon. Thousands of British soccer fans are in Stockholm for tomorrow's World Cup qualifying game between England and Sweden. Officially, there are no tickets for them, but many have been able to buy from local agencies at up to 10 times the face value.
As urgent intelligence messages were being sent from London to ports right across Holland, Denmark and Sweden, ticketless England fans, many of them anxious to protect their identity, were continuing to arrive at Stockholm Central Station. Their movements are being monitored by undercover officers dispatched to meet all incoming trains throughout the night. This evening, the name of at least one of soccer's more notorious gangs was being openly displayed in the Swedish capital. While the message the Swedes were reading in their evening newspapers was that the English fans had arrived. Some continued their journey immediately, 40 miles north to Uppsala, where the England under-21 side had their fixture against Sweden. There, the local police were prepared for every eventuality, even the hosts embarrassed by this sort of response to the British national anthem. On the field, the omens were little better. England lost 1-0. It all meant a subdued night for the fans, and with this show of police strength, trouble was prevented. At the Rosunda Stadium, the full England side were in much better spirits. A win tomorrow night and they're certain of qualifying for next summer's World Cup finals in Italy. Steve McMahon now seems certain to replace the injured captain Brian Robson. His namesake could even afford a joke about forecasting the result.
If I could predict football, I'd pick 8 draws every Saturday and I would free myself of you.
Tonight, some of these fans have now obtained tickets on the black market at vastly inflated prices. But it's how they conduct themselves tomorrow which is now the major worry, both for Stockholm and England. Bill Hamilton, BBC News, Stockholm.
Hundreds of primary school children in London had to stay at home on the first day of term today because of a shortage of teachers. The unions say the problem will get worse and they condemn the use of temporary teachers. But the education authorities say outstanding posts should be filled within the next couple of weeks.
For up to 300 London children, the new term didn't start today. There weren't any teachers for them. Inner London still has some 200 teacher vacancies and has 2,000 supply teachers providing temporary cover.
His date of birth is the 1st of January.
This Tower Hamlets school is 3 staff short. The strain is showing.
And the nursery is closed because we don't have a teacher.
Across London, hundreds more would have been sent home if head teachers hadn't taken classes themselves.
We've had this teacher shortage crisis for a long time and it isn't going to go away. And just being able to say we have a body in front of every class isn't good enough. Our children deserve better than that.
Beyond London, there are teacher shortages in Essex, Kent, Berkshire and Liverpool. With the national curriculum being phased in at every school this term, teacher shortages couldn't have come at a worse time. For all 5 and 11-year-olds, today was the first step towards national assessment tests in 2 years' time. The national curriculum will increase the demand for specialist teachers, as eventually all pupils must take science and a modern language up to 16. Already, shortages in these subjects are showing.
At the present time, you'll have some schools where the history teacher will be trying to cover some work in maths. You'll have English teachers covering work in science. You'll have teachers of sociology who will be covering work in English. It would be the nonsense. So you've got teachers who are working outside their own discipline.
There are problems in particular skill areas. There are shortages in areas on maths and science, for example. Now, that's a problem that is reflected in the economy as a whole, where we're short of some of those people, and we have been producing a range of policies to address that very problem.
The government hopes the national curriculum will raise educational standards. Continuing teacher shortages will undermine that aim.
Mrs. Thatcher will meet President Gorbachev in Moscow later this month on her way home from Japan. She last visited the Soviet Union in 1987. It's not known how long she'll stay or what's on the agenda. The meeting marks an improvement in relations following a spy row earlier this year. Thousands of East German refugees have been told that they may have to spend weeks in makeshift camps in Hungary before being allowed to go on to West Germany. Hungarian officials say they don't want to set a precedent that will encourage others to flee to the west. The British Defence Secretary Tom King is in Hungary. Evidence, he says, of a better understanding between East and West.
Even in an age of rapid east-west change, this will go down as a remarkable sight. The British Defence Secretary Tom King, dressed in Hungarian army overalls and invited to climb inside one of the Warsaw Pact's latest tanks, the T-72.
2-man or 3-man?
It's no coincidence that it's Hungary's army of all those in the East Bloc that's hosting this visit. Its government embraced Glasnost long before Gorbachev. Its firepower is no longer regarded as much of a threat to NATO, not through lack of military skill, but because Hungary's relations with its Warsaw Pact neighbours, Czechoslovakia and Romania, are far worse than with any Western country. But Hungary's openness to the West has drawn the summer flood of East Germans escaping a regime that won't reform.
Quite clearly there are movements afoot in Europe and in Eastern Europe in which people are making clear exactly what they think of their own situation and their determination to take whatever openings are there for them. And quite clearly Hungary has looked with great sympathy on the individual and personal and human plight that a lot of people have faced.
It's a flood triggered by the absence of an Iron Curtain here, brought down in May, a symbolic gesture to the West. Since Hungarians are free to leave anyway, it's drawn East Germans in their thousands. But for those still held up in Budapest's refugee camps, it hasn't proved to be the simple gateway to the West that they'd hoped for. The 5,000 are enduring overcrowding and, worse, an uncertain fate. And as the diplomatic wrangling continues, there are threats to go on hunger strike or risk crossing the border illegally. It's impossible to judge how many of the refugees will grow tired of waiting and make a run for it. One woman I've spoken to this morning said that she'll give the diplomats till Friday to get her out. If they fail, she'll try it alone. If many others do the same, it'll only complicate this already difficult diplomatic crisis. David Schuckman, BBC News, Hungary.
And in West Germany, 5 tent cities have been set up near the Austrian border to provide temporary accommodation for the refugees. The cold and wet weather is worrying the Red Cross, who fear for the health of the new arrivals.
Rows of tents in a damp car park in the small border town of Wilshofen, almost ready to take up to 1,000 East German refugees, 10 to a tent. It can scarcely be what they pictured when they left their homes and friends in search of a new way of life. It's hardly luxury, but the West German authorities say no one will spend more than 2 or 3 nights in accommodation like this while the formalities are sorted out before they're given every possible help to set up new permanent homes in the West. The authorities here, with characteristic efficiency, have organised all the basic facilities. The shower blocks arrived this afternoon. Central kitchens are next to the local supermarket. It's the biggest operation the Red Cross has mounted here since the war, but the 500 workers have no idea when the refugees will arrive. Despite the disruption to the normal quiet routine of the town, local people are preparing a warm welcome.
I've received offers from them to take in entire families with children. The churches in the town have offered rooms. The old people's home has 20 beds available for those who are sick, and offers of work have come from all over Germany.
Monika Wenzel arrived here from East Germany with her 2 young daughters 3 weeks ago. Her husband, a builder, has already found work.
The main reason I came here is that I wanted to build something, to achieve more than is possible in East Germany. If I worked my whole life there, I could not achieve what is normal for young West Germans.
50,000 East Germans have already arrived in West Germany this year, mainly skilled labourers with young families. As the authorities prepare to receive thousands more, the local community centre has been turned into a vast dormitory. The government has promised to help each refugee establish a new life. Carol Walker, BBC News, Vilshofen, West Germany.
The Irish government is to ask Britain to re-examine the decision to put Corporal Hasty back on duty after his conviction for having information useful to loyalist terrorists in Northern Ireland. The Republic's Foreign Minister, Gerry Collins, said he and his colleagues were dismayed that the corporal was back on duty in England, though the army have said he won't serve in Ulster again. Mr. Collins will raise the issue at a meeting of Irish and British ministers next week. Environmental issues are dominating tomorrow's general election in Holland. The last coalition there broke up over plans to tackle pollution, and now the main parties are competing to show how much they care about the environment.
Few cities have such clean methods of transport as Amsterdam. You can travel by boat or, like most Amsterdammers, by bicycle, so pollution is minimal. Yet the Netherlands is now in a major panic about the environment. Half of the country lies below the sea level, so if global warming raises the sea, this land will be at risk. And the Dutch have suddenly noticed filth everywhere. Litter on Parliament's doorstep, smoke belching out from steel plants, waterways caked with metallic silt, and even the prettiest landscape is suffering from too much cow dung. The government of Liberals and Christian Democrats devised a national clean-up plan, but the Christian Democrats wanted car drivers to pay more tax. The Liberals disagreed, and the coalition broke up. The collapse of the government here in The Hague has precipitated the first election in Europe in which green issues are top of the agenda. And in the past few weeks, all the main parties have been vying with one another to prove that they're the greenest of them all. The Minister for the Environment is a Liberal, but his party's defence of motorists is not proving to be a vote winner.
It was a pity because I think for my party it would have been very good to support the total environmental plan, but finally they couldn't agree about the part of the plan that was talking about the cars problem.
The Labour Party is trying to attract young voters in a campaign designed by Saatchi and Saatchi, but it looks like losing seats, despite its efforts to sound green. Ruud Lubbers, the Christian Democrats leader, looks like winning, although the Liberals may have to leave his coalition. He's campaigned on traditional conservative issues like tax cutting, but he's also mastered the green question, and that will be of interest to Mrs. Thatcher. The Dutch Prime Minister is one of her few political friends in Europe, and she'll want to know the secret of his success. Stephen Milligan, BBC News, The Hague.
The communist authorities in Vietnam say they're taking severe measures against the organisers of boat escapes. More than 50,000 boat people have fled from Vietnam to Hong Kong, where they live in squalid conditions on island refugee camps. Our Far East correspondent Brian Barron has been to Ha Long Bay in northern Vietnam, where many of the boat people originally came from, and where some have now returned.
It's the finest seaside resort in northern Vietnam. But despite the carefree appearance of Ha Long Bay, there's a dark side. Moments away is this maximum security jail. Inside, locked up 20 hours a day, are 200 alleged organisers of boat escapes from Vietnam. Their arrest is a sign the communist authorities are belatedly trying to stop the exodus of boat people. Most of today's boat people come from this impoverished coast. An unreported fact is that among them are state coal miners and their families. They're destitute because they haven't been paid for up to a year due to failures in Vietnam's banking system. To the largely unsympathetic outside world, people who escape from this country aren't refugees or victims of communist repression. They're economic opportunists. Hong Kong and other places are threatening forcible repatriation. Tough talk, but in reality, such measures would have devastating consequences for all involved. So far this year, only 250 boat people out of 50,000
have voluntarily returned from the prison camps of Hong Kong, where they're held, to Vietnam. To knowingly come back to this squalor has its price. Britain and other Western countries fund the United Nations, which pays an incentive to returnees, like this young wife, of £20 a month for a year. She was lucky to leave Hong Kong before the cholera outbreak. While detained in the colony, where this snap was taken, she met and married a fellow escaper. Today, the newlyweds are back home, temporarily better off than most law-abiding Vietnamese. There's no easy solution. That's why boat builders prosper around Halong Bay. In the dead of night, gold will change hands, and another boatload of innocents abroad will set off. Brian Barron, BBC News, Vietnam.
Here, the Test and County Cricket Board's England Committee has been meeting today to select a captain for this winter's tour to the West Indies. The decision isn't expected until Thursday morning. Meanwhile, the field of candidates appears to be narrowing.
At Lord's today, a meeting to decide on who should take the job once considered as English sport's highest honour at the end of a season which has already degenerated from tragedy to farce. The public humiliation of David Gower by the Australians has not, after all, ruled him out. He's now back in the running after he thought a summer of support had ended in his sacking. Graham Gooch is the favourite, despite, amongst other things, the potential provocation of his appointment, which was keenly felt in India last winter. His South African associations prompted the Indian government to refuse him and 7 others a visa. The tour was cancelled. Similar demonstrations in the West Indies seem inevitable, though in theory, the international cricket authorities wiped the South African slate clean in January. Gower and Gooch head a comically named shortlist. Peter Roebuck is second favourite, a thinker, but also a loner. He once presided over a bitterly divided dressing room at Somerset. Ian Gregg of Surrey is third favourite to succeed Gower, but he may not even be eligible. Phil Neal, Peter Willey, Alan Lamb are some of the other outsiders. Ian Botham doesn't even rate a price. For one former England captain, it's a straight but mistaken choice between 2 men.
Well, I think Gower or Gooch. Main reasons, I think, are that they'll go for experience. They think that's the answer. I don't, personally. I believe that we should go for youngsters, give them the opportunity. They're very keen, they're desperate to play. I'm not sure that some of the experienced players are.
The man appointed will bear a heavy burden. More failure on the pitch will bring public, often personal criticism, and his private life will also be liable to public scrutiny. All this, and the West Indian fast bowlers too.
And the main news again. Hundreds of thousands of blacks have gone on strike in South Africa to protest about the elections, in which they have no say. That's the 9 o'clock news. Good night.
Good evening. An inquiry opened today into the proposed Toyota car plant at Burniston in Derbyshire. The Japanese car company wants to build its assembly plant on over 600 acres. It'll swallow up the site of the Derby Aero Club and a number of houses and farms. Many nearby residents want the countryside preserved. The hearing is being held at Swadlincote Leisure Centre and is expected to last 9 days. A Nottinghamshire police officer is accusing his force of unlawful racial discrimination. PC Surinder Singh, who's 33, claims he was refused to transfer to CID because of his colour. The Commission for Racial Equality is supporting his claim. British Coal has been outlining its case at a public inquiry for an open-cast mine in the Erewash Valley. It wants to extract the coal at Shiloh North on the border of Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire.
Shiloh North could provide British Coal with more than 1.5 million tonnes of coal over a 7.5-year period if the plan goes ahead. It would then be landscaped to provide a haven for wildlife. But protesters at today's inquiries say they'll have to face enormous disruption.
We think that for the small amount of coal available at Shiloh, the cost to the community is far too great.
The public inquiry at Eastwood is expected to last 3 weeks.
A new ambulance station has been officially opened today in Leicester. to replace the one destroyed by fire last year. The new Goodwood ambulance station will house 14 ambulances and 40 staff. A sprinkler system and an automatic security doors are designed to combat any fire hazard. With the second depot being built near Glenfield Hospital, it's hoped ambulances will be able to reach any part of Leicester within 4 minutes. Well, that's all we've got for you this evening. Don't forget your next bulletin's on your own local radio station at 10 o'clock on John Tainton's programme. From us, good night.
Hello, another day of wide contrasts. Half an inch of rain at Cape Wrath. At the other end of the country, desert dust devils, that's mini whirlwinds in the sunny island of Guernsey. But the wettest place of all today, Murcia, or should we call it Murcia, with a proud 6 inches of rain. And that unsettled weather continuing in the Mediterranean right through and over the weekend. Meanwhile, we have this frontal system up here. Those are the thunderstorms down there, by the way, if you've got two independently acting eyes. But this is the front that should really concern us. It's going to move erratically southwards across the British Isles in the next 72 hours, becoming gradually weaker as it does so, as it runs into this long and almost persistent chain of high pressure over northern Europe and southern parts of Britain. That's where the front's going to be tomorrow. By then, having moved southwards a little bit over Scotland, then gradually moving northwards again tomorrow evening and tomorrow night, before coming southwards again on Thursday, as a much weaker feature by then, giving them more than a band of cloud. And this high will spread northeastwards behind it to give many parts of the British Isles lots of fine weather for Friday and the weekend. More of that in just a minute. Tonight, though, rather cloudy in northern and eastern Britain with rain in places, especially in the north and west of Scotland. Some quite heavy bursts of rain up there and lots of hill and coastal fog as well. Skies clear in the south, a few patches of mist, but not cold anywhere. 9 at lowest at 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, a lot of dry weather in the south, but a band of cloud and rain will gradually move southwards through Scotland and Northern Ireland in the morning, clearing up from the far north of Scotland, and that clear weather getting into other northern parts of Scotland in the afternoon. At the same time, the cloud and rain getting down towards the borders, but staying fine in the south. A lot of cloud at times, but sunshine at times as well, especially and best in the southwest. Those are the temperatures near Gear Force in the north, light in the south, quite warm too in the south, 23 Celsius, 73 degrees Fahrenheit. A band of light rain in the middle on Thursday, and that's it, a lot of dry weather for the weekend.
If you've got a window this Wednesday evening, join Wogan. Guests include the Right Honourable David Steele MP. At 7:35, a new series of Doctor Who and a cry for help.
Elizabeth is coming from. I don't think we want to go there.
Too late. We've already arrived.
Set in the near future, when the days are full of danger and the nights seem to fly by. At 8, Bergerac's back, assigned to protect a Supergrass's mother with a lot of front.
Is there a Mrs. Bergerac?
After Bergerac, points of view.
And at 9:30, Inside Story follows 3 latter-day bounty hunters in their pursuit of fugitives who jumped bail.
The one thing that is true about our profession is that they can run, but they can't hide.
A new series of Sports Night kicks off at 10:20, including action from Stockholm in the vital World Cup qualifying match between Sweden and England. And there's the best of the cricket from today's knockout semi-finals. Alien breeds, following leads, and footballing Swedes, all in your living room this Wednesday night on 1.
In 5 minutes over on 2, Charles Wheeler presents the first of 8 country-by-country accounts charting the road to war, beginning tonight with Great Britain. Here on 1 at 11:10, Barry Norman returns with a new season of Film 89, tonight looking at Fly 2 and Sex, Lies and Videotape starring Peter Gallagher. And Peter Gallagher co-stars now with Jack Lemmon in tonight's award-winning film, the 2-part true story of The Murder of Mary Fagan.